Hello, my name is Nico Pareja, and I made this podcast by myself. First off, the second industrial revolution brought along many powerful new industries. For example, electricity. Electricity allowed for worker productivity to skyrocket. It allowed longer, more productive workdays, meaning that factories could be open for 24 hours a day if required. The introduction of public electricity led to many inventions. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. Thomas Edison and Joseph Swan finally perfected the design of the light bulb in 1879. Edison's light bulb was economically safe, and it stayed on for an impressive 13.5 hours, which allowed for longer, more productive workdays. Another large and powerful industry during the Industrial Revolution was steel, or rather the mass production of it. The Bessemer process, developed in the 1850s, allowed for the mass production of steel. It allowed for the production of huge quantities of steel, in fact, with less time and less labor. The ability to mass produce steel had a huge impact on production. Some people say that the Bessemer process sparked the Industrial Revolution. Before the Bessemer process, iron rails caused problems for railroads all over the United States. The rails were soft and not very durable, and they often ripped off of the railroad tracks, causing countless complications among many railroad companies. When Bessemer steel was introduced, the nationwide railroad companies were quick to switch their old iron rails for newer, stronger steel rails. This helped reliability and durability of the roads. It also boosted jobs, as there was plenty of work to be done when placing new railroads across the country. This effect boosted the United States economy as it employed so many and allowed better transportation all over the country. During the Industrial Revolution, several scientific and chemical discoveries were made. Many of them were boring, except dynamite and colored dye, but we'll get to that later. In 1866, Alfred Nobel, a Swedish chemist, discovered dynamite. An inexpensive and relatively safe explosive, dynamite provided a much safer option to nitroglycerin, a very dangerous explosive during that time. By mixing nitroglycerin with silica, Nobel was able to create a paste which could be modeled into cylinders, making it easy to insert into holes drilled by miners. This safe explosive made the building of railroads and tunnels much faster and much safer. After Germany's unification, they took several steps to catch up during the Industrial Revolution. The first major industry was steel. However, Germany could not use the Bessemer method, as the iron in Europe was far too phosphorus. But in 1879, steel became a booming industry after the Thomas Gilchrist method allowed the use of phosphoric iron in the making of steel. This greatly boosted Germany's economy. Another one of Germany's booming industries was chemicals. In chemicals, Germany showed its scientific skills and led the production of potassium, salt, dyes, pharmaceutical products, and synthetics. It is also important to note the vulcanization of rubber. Rubber products relied on naturally occurring sap from rubber trees. While extremely useful, rubber products were susceptible to deforming and melting under heat, even as moderate as occurs on a very hot day. Charles Goodyear developed a process known as vulcanization, which gave rubber products a much more stable form at a moderately high temperature, which could deform non-vulcanized rubber. One of the most important uses for vulcanized rubber was for tires. It led to a significant rise in agricultural yields thanks to its increasing production of fertilizers. Germany also controlled 90% of dye production worldwide. This skyrocketed Germany past Great Britain. The reason Germany's industry started booming so quickly was because they kept everything inside of Germany, similar to the Zollverein before Germany was united. Keeping everything close together inside of Germany created a sense of interconnectedness and allowed railways and roads and paths and etc. to be built, making it easy to move materials, supplies, and imports and exports. During this industrious time period, it's important to note that people were moving to wherever the jobs were. For example, coal and iron were in central and northern England, which created a job market in this area for people to come and mine these resources. Thousands of people migrated from southern England to central and northern England, which caused northern cities like Manchester to grow. So, essentially, over time, rural population migrated into the urban areas. Also important, globalization. Globalization was accelerated in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution as mechanical mills and factories became more common. Many companies used raw materials from distant lands. They also sold their goods in other countries. In America, for example, long-distance transportation networks were connected by rail, steamship, and canals opened by new markets for farmers. Factory owners and bankers who could bring America's natural resources to a global marketplace. For the first time, goods from the American heartland could be shipped long distances, eliminating the need for local bartering systems. The Industrial Revolution had many horrible effects on the environment. Air pollution rose due to the factories and the great use of fuel in populated areas. Coal and iron ore were burned to run steam engines, and petroleum was used to run the engines in motor cars. These types of things resulted in huge amounts of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Other types of pollution also brought many medical problems. For example, sewer systems that were built had begun polluting water sources in other cities. This happened due to the systems not being able to properly dispose of wastes. This problem was linked to many diseases, such as typhoid, a fever that causes rashes and diarrhea, as well as cholera, a disease that causes watery diarrhea and dehydration. The death rate from typhoid was 36 per 100,000 people. In 1832, there was an outbreak of cholera because of the overcrowding and unsanitary conditions in cities. Child labor made up to 20% of the workforce during the Second Industrial Revolution. Leading causes for child labor were the need for cheap labor. Children could easily and cheaply operate heavy machinery as opposed to adults. This is also paired with poverty. Children were forced to work to help their families. Finally, a lack of government regulation to enforce safety standards, as well as working conditions and working hours. All three of these lead into the next topic of unfair and unsafe working conditions, specifically for women. Many things were different for female laborers than for male laborers. Firstly, women were automatically paid less than men in factories. Second, they were also excluded from work unions. Not only were they paid less than men, but the work conditions were highly dangerous and work hours were extremely long. In response to these conditions, young female textile workers organized America's first industrial protest strikes and reform groups. Those who were fortunate may have become maids for wealthier families. Others may have worked as governesses for rich children. The less fortunate may have been forced to work in shocking conditions during the day, and then have to return home to conduct the household domestic needs. More than likely, a woman of the working classes would usually be expected to go out to work, often in the mills or the mines. As with the children and the men, the hours were long and conditions were also hard. Now for the comparison of socialism and capitalism. Capitalism and socialism vary in that capitalism allows for individuals the right of property and business. The amount of money a product costs is relative to the demand of the product and how difficult it is to manufacture. The capitalist system places emphasis on efficiency over equality. Capitalism argues that inequality is what drives innovation and creativity. It is what motivates people to take the next step towards success. In a capitalist economy, the state does not directly employ the workforce. This can lead to unemployment during times of economic recession. However, in a socialist economy, the state owns and controls the major means of production. The primary concern of the socialist model, in contrast, is to have an equal redistribution of wealth and resources from the rich to the poor, creating a fair economy where everybody is closer to the same playing field. This means that the state intervenes in the labor markets and the state acts as a primary employer. Key takeaways are that capitalism is a market-driven economy. The state does not intervene in the economy, leaving it up to market forces to shape society and life. Socialism is characterized by state ownership of businesses and services. Central planning is used to attempt to make society more equitable. And finally, it's important to note that most countries are mixed economies, falling in between the extremes of capitalism and socialism. Industrialization takes a heavy toll on a country's natural resources. They need steel to build railways and heavy machinery, as well as coal and lumber to burn the fuel that powers the massive amount of factories. Well, one day somebody thought of stealing resources from underdeveloped nations that weren't industrializing yet, because it was cheaper for them. So, through imperialism, countries were able to start colonies that had access to untapped natural resources. Not only did they gain free access to abundant amounts of natural resources like lumber, coal, and iron, they also gained additional labor workers by forcing many of the indigenous people to work in colony factories. A prime example of the colonization of regions for their resources is the scramble for Africa. Africa is home to some of the largest deposits of natural resources in the world, and during the scramble for Africa, many European nations were after one thing: oil. But not only oil. There was also gas, timber, diamonds, gold, coltan, and bauxite to be collected. The map shown in the picture displays a full geological map of England and Wales with inland navigations exhibiting districts of coal and other sites of mineral tonnage. This shows the abundance of coal and other minerals being mined and how fast they were depleting in the UK. This is why it was important for European nations to take resources from other uncolonized areas.